Howdy, y'all. Welcome back. Thank you for being here. First and foremost, I wanted to say thank you so much for helping my channel to reach 130,000 subscribers. 2025 has been a difficult year so far, to say the least, but luckily, we have endless old world research to keep our minds firing on all cylinders. One of the most fascinating and at times questionable narratives in our historical timeline would have to be that of the Susquehannock Indigenous People. For centuries, the Susquehannock reigned over much of what is today New York, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and even Washington, D.C. And yet, by the early 20th century, this distinguished group of indigenous people was declared extinct by the government of Pennsylvania. Indeed, it was on Pennsylvanian soil in which the last congregation of Susquehannock had organized, and this occurred in my hometown of Lancaster. However, to fully understand the magnitude of the Susquehannock people, I'd like to first paint a vivid picture of their culture, society, and the architecture that was attributed to them. According to the currently accepted narrative, the Susquehannock began their history with the onset of the Little Ice Age around the year 1450. This forced the Susquehannock further south. They traveled along the massive river on which they had constructed their settlements, now aptly known as the Susquehanna River. Here is where we start to realize the sheer magnitude of what we are discussing. The Susquehanna River is one of the oldest existing rivers in the entire world and possibly the oldest in America, being formed roughly 330 million years ago. For example, the Susquehanna is far older than the mountain ridges through which it runs, and from roughly 252 million years ago through 66 million years ago, the Susquehanna River was unimaginably wide, covering most of the flat tidelands of eastern North America. So to say there's some history hidden here is an understatement. And whether you agree with the current narrative or not, you have to admit there must be some significance to what might possibly be the oldest and at one time the widest river in America. Now back to the history of the Susquehannock. When they began to travel south around the year 1450, they left from roughly an area known then as Tioga Point, meaning this location was said to be at that time one of their largest original settlements, and remarkably, Tioga Point has since been renamed and is now known as Athens. Coincidence or old world symbolism? To illustrate the extent and advancement of their kingdom, the Susquehannock were said to have constructed a massive earthwork and palisaded fortification in Lancaster County along the Susquehanna River by the year 1500. By 1600, this site was said to have been overcrowded, and the Susquehannock then extended what was their capital city to reach the Washington borough of Pennsylvania. The name Washington becomes important elsewhere in this narrative, as we are told by 1605, the Susquehannock had also extended their interconnected settlements to reach the Potomac River Valley in what is today Virginia, Maryland, and nearby to the United States capital, Washington, D.C. Now, what's important here is that we're told the Susquehannock built fairly intricate earthworks and then built palisades or wooden walls on top to protect their fortification. If you know anything about the earliest star forts that were founded in America, this is exactly what they looked like. Earthworks with wooden palisades on top. It truly wasn't until the establishment of vast trade routes in America that we begin to see the more European-looking star forts being founded here. What ties this further to the Susquehannock is their first encounter with a European settler was said to have occurred in the year 1608, with an interaction with infamous explorer John Smith, who had made his way into the Chesapeake Bay. Again, if you are unfamiliar, the Chesapeake Bay is one of the most gorgeous and mysterious bodies of water in the world. From its earliest recorded history, it was said to have been in the control of the Susquehannock, as the Chesapeake Bay is the end of the 444-mile-long Susquehanna River. The entire length of the river was written by John Smith to be controlled solely by the Susquehannock, with massive earthwork palisaded fortifications dotted along the length of the river. Smith also wrote that the Susquehannock were remarkably pale, with dark hair and light-colored eyes, and they stood a full head taller than their European counterparts, estimated to be 6.5 to 7 feet tall. And this was not just one of the Susquehannock that were this tall, but a group of 60 of them were said to have welcomed Smith upon his arrival to the Chesapeake Bay. Again, the Susquehannock, even in this current narrative, sound much different than any other indigenous American group we have researched before. What makes this interaction with John Smith even more notable is that Smith also wrote that the Susquehannock were in possession of advanced weaponry made of brass, including what appeared to be cannons, which he could only assume were French in origin. However, it's interesting we don't have any described interaction between the French and the Susquehannock before this time, which you'd think the French would have wrote about given the Susquehannock's rather unique history and appearance. The narrative continues by telling us that the Susquehannock ruled over nearly all fur trade in the region, trading with the English, the Dutch, and the Swedish, and obtaining muskets. When the Susquehannock marched through Lenape territory on a trade excursion and were challenged in the mid-1630s, the Susquehannock were said to have won a decisive battle, leading to years of the Lenape being subjects to and paying tribute to the Susquehannock. With the founding of the province of Maryland in 1634, Britain essentially declared war on the Susquehannock, further heightened by the province and Britain aligning with the Piscataway tribe, another whom had been forced to pay tribute to the Susquehannock for many years. With their British trade routes broken, the Susquehannock turned to New Sweden, and would you believe it? An earthwork, a palisaded star fort, was created in New Sweden, named Fort Christiana. While looking exactly like the described Susquehannock forts, and while being built to facilitate fur trade with the Susquehannock, and while we're told the Susquehannock were skilled architects employed by colonists to establish new settlements, nowhere in the current narrative does it say that the Star Fort, Fort Christiana, was built by the Susquehannock. It just makes you think. Furthermore, given the significance of the Susquehanna River to all of American history, a theory arose in the early 17th century, which still persists to this day, a theory that the Susquehannock are descendants of the Mound Builders. If you're unfamiliar, prior to the previously mentioned Little Ice Age, a widespread group of related indigenous people established massive earthworks, earth effigies, settlements, and cities across the Midwestern United States between roughly the years 500 AD to 1400 AD. And yet, for as long as these groups reigned supreme in America, they disappeared seemingly without a trace before the arrival of European settlers. Many question this history and the established timeline for the Mound Builders, and some have theorized the earthworks of America are far older than what is currently accepted, with some claiming them to be antediluvian. Still, others claim that the Old World was not so long ago, and that residue of the Mound Builders, maybe even the people themselves, still existed when the first Europeans stepped foot onto this landscape. One thing we do know is that often these mounds signified locations that had been established along ancient routes, and in many instances, these earthwork settlements were then transformed into some of the first forts and European towns in America. For example, Pittsburgh was the site of numerous mound builder effigies and then became one of the most important star forts in pre-revolutionary America, before then becoming one of the largest cities in the country during the Industrial Age. Not only did these earthworks play a significant role to shaping America, but these epic pieces of shaped land and architecture also greatly resembled the palisaded settlements of the Susquehanna. Given that fact, and the odd yet almost never discussed fact that many of the mound builders' burial mounds found across the country contained skeletons that stood well over 7 feet tall, and tying that to the descriptions of the Susquehannock of a similar build, And given these remains in the burial mounds have often been described as having light-colored eyes and hair, and seeing how many other indigenous groups appeared to venerate the Susquehannock, we can only begin to imagine the implications it would have if the Susquehannock truly did descend from the mound builders. Which leads to 1643. This is when the British Jesuit order formed a massive mission to try to convert the Susquehannock, and if not, then to try to conquer them. As you can imagine, this did not go as planned. The governor of Maryland went as far as to hiring militias, but it was to no avail. The Susquehannock were said to have won nearly every battle that they took part in, capturing multiple British cannons and burning through numerous British settlements. The Susquehannock continued these raids well into the year 1652, when the Mohawk were then armed by the British and sent to destroy the Susquehannock. Again, this aggression was easily repelled, but the Susquehannock then chose to sign the Articles of Peace and Friendship to reestablish trade with the British and to facilitate further accommodations for the Susquehannock. It is around this time that the Susquehannock began to be involved in the construction of early settlements in Maryland for the colonists, again, showing their affinity for architecture. By the year 1660, the Susquehannock are described as, quote, the security of the northern part of the province, end quote. And that comes from official Maryland documents. Those Jesuits, however, really seemed interested in the Susquehannock, and with good reason. In 1671, the Jesuit report lists a raid of 800 Seneca warriors on what they believed to be an unoccupied major Susquehannock settlement on the Chesapeake Bay. When the Seneca arrived to the Susquehannock settlement, they were correct, as nearly no adult male men remained in the village. And yet, the Seneca were met by a conglomerate of 300 Susquehannock, mostly adolescent boys, no older than the age of 14. In the ensuing battle, it is written that the 300 Susquehannock boys not only routed the 800 Seneca warriors, but the 300 Susquehannock boys were also said to have been the same size, if not taller, than the adult Seneca men. Just a little more food for thought in this narrative, as for roughly 200 years of European history in America, the Susquehannock appeared to be unconquerable. That is, until the trickery and rewriting of the narrative. History tells us that this group, the Susquehanna, that was undefeated in major battles until roughly 1671, who ruled over the majority of what became 3 different states. The narrative tells us that by 1675, the Susquehannock were easily defeated by the Iroquois and forced to leave their capital in Pennsylvania to move towards Washington, D.C. Luckily, even in the current narrative, we have modern scholars that are calling malarkey on that one. More likely, it's argued that Charles Calvé, the governor of the Maryland province, promised certain trade amenities and gifts to the Susquehannock, as well as arms and protection, if they moved into his province and built a new colony. We could even take this a step further and see how Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area was largely unoccupied and undeveloped at this time. It was still an unknown. That is, until the Susquehannock moved into the area in 1675, establishing the first trade routes, earthworks, and palisaded forts on the same location that would become the United States capital over 100 years later. Then we have a very strange event. It is largely believed that colonists either orchestrated raids themselves or hired other indigenous groups to conduct raids on newly founded European settlements nearby the new Susquehannock capital in Maryland. The Susquehannock were then quickly blamed for these raids, and a 1,000-man militia was organized to eliminate the Susquehannock from the area. It's almost as if the colonists hired the Susquehannock to clear out Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area, to establish trade routes and settlements, to help construct roads and structures, and then to kick them out of the region before taking it over. But I digress. The siege of the Susquehannock fort was said to have lasted for over 6 weeks. Does it really make sense that a simple earthwork and wood palisaded fort would take 6 weeks to penetrate? Or could it be that the Susquehannock had constructed far more advanced structures than they are given credit for in the current narrative, and these feats of indigenous engineering were deemed to be quite difficult for the Europeans to conquer? We're told the Susquehannock escaped in the middle of the night in early winter, with a large portion of their people giving up their identities and assimilating with the nearby Lenape. An estimated 60 to 90% of the Susquehannock assimilated with other indigenous people during this time, as the governments of both Virginia and Maryland had declared war on them. However, the remaining 10 to 40% of the Susquehannock people returned to the Susquehanna River, to their original homeland in Lancaster, where the Pennsylvania government was willing to give them a sanctuary, a safe home to protect the last of their people, or so they thought. By 1681, the Susquehannock had established Conestoga Town in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, along the Conestoga River, a major tributary of the Susquehanna, which cuts through the land to create the boundaries for the county of Lancaster. The history of Conestoga Town is pretty remarkable. First, Conestoga is the British word for Susquehannock, and from that name, Conestoga, derives the term stogie, being the colloquial term for the cigar, a creation that was first introduced to European settlers by the Susquehannock. In the Conestoga Town, we also have the inventing or founding of the Conestoga wagon, the wagon that was said to have conquered the West. We also have the invention of the first repeating rifle occurring in the Conestoga Town, formerly known as a Conestoga or Lancaster, but now known as a Kentucky rifle. Conestoga Town became the trade hub of all of Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia, and Lancaster grew to one of the largest cities in all of America. However, as many groups began to assimilate in the Conestoga Town, the ancient customs became lost. Only a few pure-blooded Susquehannock remained, and among them, only a few elders could speak the Susquehannock language, which was known to them as the ancient tongue. By 1763, we're told everyone but the ancient Susquehannock speakers had left the Conestoga Town, and these few remaining individuals, numbering around 20 or less, were the last to keep the ancient customs alive. Again, take this all with a grain of salt, but we're told a radical group known as the Paxton Boys formed in Pennsylvania, looking to erase indigenous history and to claim indigenous lands. This group marched to the Conestoga Town in the middle of the night, and the ensuing decimation saw every last Susquehannock lose their lives. From this point forward, the Susquehannock were considered all but extinct, and this was actually made law in 1941. A bill was proposed to protect descendants of Susquehannock people and provide them with protected land in Dauphin County, Pennsylvania. However, even though the bill was passed, it was immediately vetoed by the governor of Pennsylvania, Arthur James, who used court documents to claim that the last of the Susquehannock had died due to the Paxton Boys' attack in 1763. The Susquehannock have never been brought up again in a governmental capacity since that time period, and their purposeful erasing from our history is what I feel could be one of the biggest tragedies to have ever occurred on American soil, especially when we consider the possibility that the Susquehannock were involved in constructing some of our largest cities, including the American capital. I want to end this video by showing you my visit to the King and Queen seat in Maryland. I was out exploring, looking for the second largest waterfall in Maryland, Kilgore Falls. And while in the forest on these trails, I found markers for a location that was called the King and Queen seat. So of course I had to visit. This site was actually said to have been where the Susquehannock would meet and hold ceremonies, and the king would climb to the top of this stone throne and he would make his speeches. So I climbed to the top of this 200-foot tall outcropping. This is also said to be the location where in the mid-1600s, the Iroquois, after many years of losing battles and paying tribute, became equals to the Susquehannock when the Iroquois princess was married to the Susquehannock prince. Hence the name of this site, the King and Queen Seat, thus uniting the tribes after centuries of warring. I'd like to end this video, the real, true ending of this video, by giving those who are interested a little bit of an update on my personal life. If you're unfamiliar, in roughly November of last year, I went through a pretty significant separation from someone who was really important to the channel. She didn't necessarily help me with my research, but she did help me to relax, to make the videos, to edit the videos, to put out the best content that I could for all of you. So that was very difficult for me, and I'd been searching for ways to fill up my time since then, just donating and volunteering and exploring and things like that. But I decided I wanted to rescue a puppy. I love dogs, I love animals, and I found a puppy that was in pretty bad conditions on a farm. And little did I know when I rescued this animal that he was actually going to be really sick. I took the puppy to the vet, came to find out that he had parvo. If you don't know what that is, look it up, but it's very contagious. It can be very deadly, and it's very expensive to treat. So then I had a decision to make if I wanted to fully commit to this, and of course I wasn't going to let this puppy suffer. So I paid to have this puppy go through treatment, and now I'm happy to say Chiron, his name is Chiron, he is at home. He's as healthy as can be. He's growing bigger every single day. He's probably the best friend that I have in the entire world. And if you guys want, I can post some pics and videos with him. But that was an experience that I went through that put a bit of a financial burden on me, to say the least. But lucky for me, I had set aside a little bit of money in case something like this happened. However, then in early March, I had decided to visit my best friend who lives in South Carolina. I had went there earlier this year, and I decided to make another visit down there because there was so much beautiful history and architecture that I still had not yet explored down there. But when I got there, and I still don't really know what happened, I got very, very sick. Threw up a bunch of times, couldn't keep any food down, ended up in the emergency room, and do not have insurance, don't have insurance in Pennsylvania, definitely don't have insurance in South Carolina. Before I even went into treatment there, I was in excruciating pain, but I did try to talk to everyone there, as did my friend who had to take me to the hospital. And we basically talked to the charge nurse there to make sure that it wasn't going to be some ridiculously high charge for me going to the emergency room. And they said, oh no, it shouldn't be more than a couple $1,000s, which is still a lot of money. But then I got a bill after I returned home, after I stayed in the hospital. And again, I didn't even stay for one whole day. I was there for 6 hours maybe, and then when I returned home, I got a bill to my house here in Pennsylvania, and the bill was for $10,000. And then they told me, oh, you don't have insurance. Your bill is only $7,000. But I'm at the point right now where I've already told you about this in other videos. I don't want to harp on it too much, but others have asked for an update. With the money you've donated, I have about $2,000 that I've been able to put towards this medical bill. And then I've also taken $4,000 out of my emergency fund, so that's basically depleted at this point. But I have been able to pay about everything but $1,000 of this medical bill. So that's all I have left right now. I'm looking to take care of that and continue to take care of myself, keeping my health in mind. I've been going out, trying to eat more healthy, drinking smoothies every day, taking my dog out on walks, going out and exploring and hiking and finding locations out in nature that I have never seen before and that I have never seen shared with anyone else before. So that's why I'm taking and showing these photographs to you right now. But I also just wanted to give you an update. If there is anyone out there who has the financial means, who would like to support the channel, and right now all of that support is going directly towards my medical bills. So if you want to do that, I will leave a link right here in this video. I have had some trouble with leaving these links in my profile, and I just don't want to make anything too complicated. So for those of you out there who have watched the video this much, who have been with my channel, who know me, who enjoy this work, who have seen all of the things that we have discovered together, uncovered together, peeled back the veil of history, if you have the ability to, you can go to this link and you can support me there. But other than that, please just continue to watch my videos, to share my videos, to comment and like my videos, because all of the interaction helps the channel to grow, and all of the growth is going to help get this information out there, to get these photographs out there, and to show the world these different aspects of history that most are not familiar with.